You're listening to the Nutrition Experts Podcast, featuring guests who take the scientific talk about food and break it down for practical use. You've heard the phrase, "You are what you eat." Come find out what that really means. Experience conversations with experts in the field of nutrition and understand the power of food for our health, well-being, and beyond. Now, here's your host, registered dietitian and nutritionist, Mathea Ford.
Hi there, it's Mathea. Welcome back to the Nutrition Experts Podcast, the podcast featuring nutrition experts who are leading the way using food starts today, right now, with our next guest. It's great to have Susan Dopart on the show today. Susan, welcome to Nutrition Experts.
Thank you, Mathea, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Great. I'm excited to have you on the show and share your expertise with my tribe. Can you start with telling my listeners a little more about you and what you do?
Sure. I'm a registered dietitian and exercise physiologist, and also what we call a Minty Motivational Interviewing Network trainer. And so I have a private practice in Los Angeles, and I do motivational interviewing trainings on a weekly basis, both in person and virtually. And I also actually have 4 books out as well on different nutrition topics, but mostly related to insulin resistance and diabetes.
Okay, so can you talk a little bit about motivational interviewing? I'm sure dietitians have heard about it, maybe even done a little training on it, but can you go through and kind of talk through what it is and why we would want to use that?
Right, sure. Well, motivational interviewing is a collaborative partnership language that helps evoke someone's own motivation for change. Because when you think about it, everyone's ambivalent about something, and most people are very ambivalent about changing their diet. The last thing they want to hear from a dietitian is just eat chicken and broccoli. How do we have a conversation with a client so they're the one talking about change versus us, the dietitians, telling people what to do? Years ago, I was working at UCLA as a renal dietitian, and I remember one Sunday, a physician had written a diet order that said, no cholesterol, no salt, no phosphorus, no potassium, no sodium, and underneath the diet tech wrote, no fun. And I thought to myself in that moment, that's what patients think of us. We're no fun, right? And how do we have a different conversation so that someone isn't cringing when we're walking in the room? Another person just telling me what to do, telling me what I can't eat. Fast forward about 15 years ago, I read the book Motivational Interviewing and thought, wow, this is a great way to help people with changes that they're struggling with. And so I trained in it, and about 10 years ago, I became a trainer. And I will say it has completely rocked my world. It is a beautiful way of being and talking to people so that you evoke their motivation for change, and I would say more lasting change than the typical way we usually talk to patients in terms of just telling them what to do.
Can you give us an example?
It's a way of coming alongside your clients and reflecting what you hear and reflecting what their own internal wisdom is about how to have a conversation. So I thought I could do with you is, a lot of times we ask a lot of questions, and people in my training say, I wish I just knew the questions to ask. And we think of questions as looking at the problem from the outside. And what we call reflections, and I'll get to that more later, reflections are looking at the problem from the inside. So how do we as clinicians trust that the person in front of us has the answer inside of them and reflect what we hear so we get to what will make them be successful? So let's just do a little role play if you're willing to, Mathea. And we call it in motivational interviewing the checklist versus the conversation. So if we can have 2 different conversations, the first one will be the checklist and the second one will be the conversation. So tell me, where did you go on your last vacation, your last trip?
Orange Beach, Alabama.
Okay. And how did you get there?
I flew there and drove home.
Okay. And how many hours did it take to fly there?
Probably 6.
And how many hours did it take to get home?
Oh, a day and a half. We stopped halfway.
Okay. And who'd you go with?
Oh, my husband and my 2 children.
Okay. And how many days were you there?
Oh, we were there a week.
Wait. Okay. So let's rewind. Let's pretend that we never had that conversation. That's our checklist conversation. So, Mathea, tell me about your last trip.
Well, I went to Orange Beach, Alabama with my family for a beach vacation.
So you got to be at the beach in an enjoyable atmosphere with the people that you love.
Absolutely. Right on the beach. Got to go out to the sand every day and or sit in the pool, whichever one I wanted.
You had a choice.
Yes.
Yeah, about how you wanted to be in nature and enjoy yourself.
Yep.
Yeah. No real responsibilities of usual daily life.
Right. Just had to make sure my kids were fed.
Yeah. Is everyone fed and happy? And
sunscreen. That was a responsibility. Sunscreen.
Right. So food and sunscreen, and then the rest of the time you got to just chill and relax.
Yeah, I actually usually read a book or two, and I read one called Story Brand by Donald Miller.
So you got to expand your horizon to help out with your show.
Yeah, it's a really good book about telling stories. We all know telling stories is more compelling than just facts.
Right. It's all about the story, right?
Yeah.
So if I can summarize, you had this lovely vacation where you went with your family, you got to be in nature, you got to be by the beach or be at the pool. You didn't have as many responsibilities as you have in daily life, and you got to expand your mind with some new cool book.
Absolutely. Yep.
So how did you feel with the first conversation versus the second conversation?
Well, the first conversation, it wasn't yes, no questions, but it was almost yes, no questions. It was like not. And now, normally, I probably answered them just a little bit more because I don't really know you that well. If you were my friend and you're like, where did you go on vacation? Or what did you do on your last vacation? I probably would have elaborated. But because I don't necessarily know you personally and talk to you on a regular basis, I really didn't feel like you wanted me to elaborate.
You didn't really feel safe to do that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And how did you feel in the second conversation?
Well, I felt like you were listening and kind of following what I was saying and then asking follow-up questions and really, interested in what I was saying.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interested in you as a human being.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's just a little snippet of asking a bunch of questions, which creates that yes-no answer and promotes what we call disengagement, right? And the second way was reflecting, I say, all the deliciousness of what you were telling me to move the conversation forward. Part of what we want to do in motivational interviewing is reflect what we hear. And Stephen Rolnick, who's one of the authors of MI, says that 90% of people do not know how to reflect. They just know how to ask questions or give advice. So how do we help people in a different way and reflect what we hear? And there's 2 different types of reflections in motivational interviewing. One is called simple, where you just reflect basically what you heard, but the common way or the most effective way to help a client is to reflect in a way we call a complex reflection, which adds meaning to what we heard to move the conversation forward.
So what would have been a complex reflection in that back and forth we just had?
Well, basically, when you talked about being at the beach or at the pool, I said you got to be in nature, you got to enjoy yourself. Those are things you didn't say, but I added meaning to what you said to help you want to talk more.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So a simple reflection is really more just like, so I hear you saying that you went to the beach.
Exactly. It doesn't do anything. Someone says, yeah, I went to the beach, but if I add meaning to what you said, it makes someone go in their head and think about saying more. Now, it's a guess on my part, and a lot of complex reflections are guesses, but we say in motivational interviewing, it's okay to guess, because if you're wrong, the client will correct you and tell you what their truth is. And that brings me to another really important part of motivational interviewing, which is called the spirit of MI, which is compassion, collaboration, partnership, and evocation. And even though we are experts in nutrition in our field, we are not the expert in the client in front of us. So how do we combine our expertise with their expertise in them and have what we call equal power sharing, because if we keep telling people what to do, it's human nature that they're going to take the opposite approach and tell us why it's not going to work for them. And there's a big problem with that. If you're telling someone you need to exercise and they tell you all the reasons why it's too much work for them or it is not going to fit in their schedule, when someone says that out loud, it reinforces to their brain that they're not going to do it. They become more committed to it, right? So Bill Miller, one of the other authors of MI, says, don't take the good lines, because if you're taking the good lines of you need to exercise or you need to eat healthfully, your client is going to take the more reluctant or resistant lines and say, that's not going to, I can't do that. I've tried that before. And the problem with that is they get more committed to that. And it creates more ambivalence. So we try to evoke the good lines. So when you've exercised in the past or you've lost weight, what worked for you? They have to go in their head. They have to say it out loud, which reinforces to them how they're successful. And then all you have to do is reflect it back. Oh, so when you were able to exercise in the past, you got up early in the morning, or you joined a class, or you took a walk with your spouse. You just have to reflect whatever they said to move that conversation towards change. So MI is a language. It's a language that gets layered in your brain the more you use it. And a lot of times clinicians say, oh, I know MI. I went to a class, or I took a webinar, or I went to this introductory day of it. And the problem with that is it's a great way to start to learn MI, but it's because it's a language, you can't learn French or Spanish in a day. So it's, you have to be committed to really putting in time to really learning it so you can utilize it effectively with clients. And one thing I say in my trainings, well, is it worth it? Well, if you find yourself having the same conversation with your clients, well, you're the one arguing for change and they keep staying stuck in their ambivalence, then maybe there's a different way that you could talk to them so that you are truly getting them to talk about change versus you talking about change. And if you feel like you're always stuck in the water with people, this is a way to help move through that stuckness.
So you mentioned the 4 processes, or the spirit of MI: engage, focus, evoke, plan. And you talked a little bit about evoke. Can you talk about each of those a little bit deeper?
Sure. And what was interesting is motivational interviewing is in its 3rd edition now. So, and that came out a few years ago, and that's when they added these processes called engage, focus, evoke, plan. And a lot of times you hear people try to get to the plan immediately. Well, what's your plan? What do you want to do? Without ever using the other three processes. So engage, that's the process where, you're really getting someone on board with a conversation with you. And research shows that a client will make a decision about whether you can help them in the first 1 to 2 minutes. So how do you engage someone and make those 2 minutes really count, right? And part of that is reflecting what you hear so they feel safe. Because if they don't feel safe, if they feel like you're going to tell them what to do or give them advice that they're not sure they want, there's not going to be engagement. And without engagement, there's really not going to be a conversation. Stephen Rolnick says 20% of the conversation is engagement, right? And so when someone walks in my office, I'll say, thank you for coming in. That's a great way to show engagement. Thank you for being here. Tell me what would be most helpful today. What would you like things to look like? And you see people kind of look at you like, I've never heard that one before, and then they kind of start to relax and they go in their head and they think about their motivation, why they're there. And then all you have to do is do a few reflections. And within 2 minutes, they're engaged. They feel safe. You create what we call a working alliance with them, because without a working alliance, people don't change. They don't come back. You have to create that working alliance from the get-go. And once you have that, then you can, ask some open-ended questions like, tell me what would be most helpful today. What would you like to talk about? What would you like to work on? That's the focus. Because many times they have like a lot of things in their head. And if you haven't found the focus, then you can't go on to working on what they really came for, right? So if someone says, I'd really like to figure out a way to lower my blood sugars, a reflection might be, so you came here because you really care about your health and your diabetes. You really want to figure out a way how to get those blood sugars down. That's why you came in, right? That's a complex reflection that leads towards change. We're always trying to go towards what we call change talk. In motivational interviewing, we say there's 3 types of talk. There's discord, there's sustained talk, and change talk. And our goal is to always pull, we call it pulling for change talk. So the other types of talk, one is called discord. That's when there's smoke in the room, the conversation's going south. Someone says, you don't understand me, you don't get my world. You never want to have conversations that lead towards that. And if you hear that, you have to repair. You have to say, I'm sorry, or else there is no working alliance. There won't be any conversation about change. Sustained talk is about someone's ambivalence. It's about, just their wanting and not wanting incompatible things at the same time, which is many times thought of as resistance, but it's really just ambivalence, right? And a clinician can invite ambivalence with what they reflect. For example, here's how you do it. Someone could say, in response to that same conversation with the diabetic, you really want to change your blood sugars, and yet it's really hard for you and you're not sure how to do that. I just reflected on the second part of my reflection, someone's struggle, which the client will talk about the next thing that you said. So the next part, they'll talk about their struggle. If I flip it and say, although this is really, really hard for you, you came here because you want to figure out a way to help your blood sugars come down. The next thing they're going to talk about is how to get their blood sugars to come down. So it all depends. We have so much control and direction in how the conversation is going to go, and we don't even know it. We don't even know it. But many times, I work with a lot of dietitians who are working to learn motivational interviewing, and there's a few of them, but they're always reflecting the struggle. And the whole conversation is about the struggle, right? And if you flip it, you can acknowledge the struggle because you want to be empathetic, but you can reflect what we call the dream or the vision or the values, so that you're pulling someone's brain to go towards what makes them be successful, right? What makes them go in the direction of change. And if you know how to do that, it makes your job so much easier. You get out of that struggle with clients, you get out of that stuckness. And at the end of the day, your life is so much easier. It's so much more simple because your clients are happy. They're talking about change. They're talking about ways they're successful in their lives, and they want to come back because they know that you're going to help them get through what's getting in the way of them not being successful.
And then the change talk is really when you're kind of they're making those decisions, those commitments, I guess, or how is that different than the sustain?
There's different types of, that's getting into a little more details of motivational interviewing, but there's two types of change talk. There's preparatory change talk, where they're talking about their desire, their abilities, their reasons for change, or their needs. And then there's commitment talk, which is, like what you said, I'm willing to do this. My plan is to do this. We say in motivational interviewing, if you've done a good job of engaging, finding the focus, and evoking what makes someone successful, the plan or the commitment language will just emerge. You don't even have to ask about it. So when you've been successful with checking your blood sugars, you set a timer. Or when your blood sugars were more even keeled, you made sure to have protein at every meal. And then someone just follows that up. Yeah, I realize now talking to you, I was able to control my blood sugars when I included protein at every meal and I watched my carbs, or whatever it is. You're trying to go in and see, almost be a detective about what has made them successful in the past. And can they pull from that and use it in their current situation with whatever they're ambivalent about?
When you think about clients and kind of how they do a little bit of resistance, or you said it's ambivalence, what is typical that people are going to, or you see clients usually showing? What kind of ambivalence, what kind of resistance?
Well, everyone's ambivalent about something, right? Should I pay bills or should I go to the movies? Should I go for a walk when I get home from work, or should I sit in front of the TV and watch Netflix? It's like so many things in our life we're ambivalent about or we're procrastinating about. And like I said, it's thought of as resistance. So how do you, a lot of times people will come in and they're resistant because, they think you're a dietitian, you're just going to tell me what to eat, right? And food is very intimate, right? Many times people don't want to be told what to eat. Now, I will say if someone is super motivated and comes in, I don't need to use motivational interviewing. But most of the time, I will use it because people, have been ambivalent. They're struggling with how to be successful. They may say something like, I've seen a lot of dietitians in the past. Nothing's worked. I'm just here because my doctor told me to come in. Those are some resistance statements. So I'm just going to reflect what I hear and say, so, you haven't had a lot of success in the past. You've had experiences with people telling you what to do. It really hasn't worked. And even though your doctor said for you to come in, I'm wondering, you had a choice about that. You had a choice about whether you were going to come in. And I'm wondering what made you decide to really make that appointment and come in. Okay. They have to go in their head. They have to think about their motivation. They have to say it out loud, which reinforces to their brain why they came in. And then all I have to do is reflect it to make the conversation move towards change. Because what they're doing is they're throwing out a smoke screen. And what we don't want to do is take the bait. Don't take the bait with the smoke screen. Or sometimes clients will say to a dietitian, well, tell me what you eat. You don't take the bait. You never tell them what you eat. You emphasize autonomy. You say, well, what I eat is going to be completely different than what you eat, because we're different people, we have different physiologies. So today we have to figure out what's going to work for you, what's going to be the way that's going to work for you. And together we're on this journey to figure out how to help balance your food, control your blood sugars. Tell me, even though you're struggling with this now, is there anything that's worked for you in the past, right? Because remember, we're trying to evoke what has made them successful. So there's a lot of different ways you can navigate these motivational interviewing conversations. But if you have resistance, you have to roll with it. You don't head into it. You just roll with it till there's nothing left to resist against.
Because all the things they're saying are things that they've been successful with in the past, or they're telling you what they're struggling with, so you can, I guess you're reframing it for them in a way by reflecting.
Yeah. Another thing that's, interesting with dietitians, when people come in, they start confessing, right? Like, I haven't done this, I haven't done that, I haven't done that. It's kind of like you're the parent, a way to kind of deflect that in motivational interviewing is say, well, let's put that aside. You showed up today. I'm making what I call an affirmation. I'm noticing what they're doing well and affirming that. You could have canceled, you could have no-showed, but you came in today showing you really want to change this. So I'm wondering what actually worked for you this week. What do you feel like you did well, right? I'm pulling for change talk. I'm pulling for them to tell me what they did well, say it out loud. I reflect it to go have the conversation go towards change, right? So you want to stay away from being punitive or, being the taskmaster, right? Or some things that are, normal sometimes with conversations with professionals where it's kind of a setup for you telling someone what they didn't do or they're wrong or, threatening types of statements, because those don't lead towards change.
So how do you dig a little deeper if you feel like someone's not telling you the whole story? So they're just really, I came here because my doctor wanted me to, and they're like, I don't know why. If they start kind of not telling you the whole story, or you suspect, like you mentioned, you're the food police. Sometimes they're like confessing, but they also come in with a perfect story because they've been to so many dietitians. They know what they're supposed to say.
Right. Well, why don't we do a little role play and you be that person and I'll model it for you.
Okay. So where do you want to?
So you start with you just say what you just said, and I'll be the.
I don't know. My doctor sent me here, but I eat fine. I eat 3 meals a day. I eat good food. I always have vegetables, and I don't know why I'm not losing weight.
So it's a little bit of a quandary. You're doing everything possible you know how to do, and yet the scale's not budging.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. So tell me a little bit more about that. Tell me about kind of what your day looks like and all the things that you feel like you're doing.
Well, I get up in the morning. I always have breakfast. I usually eat a bagel and I put a little bit of cream cheese on it. And then I go to work, take my lunch, always take a salad, put a little bit of grilled chicken on it. And then I use like a low-cal salad dressing, and I have an afternoon snack. I try to get a little handful of walnuts. And then in the evening, I come home, and 3 days a week, I walk for an hour on my treadmill, and after dinner, and then dinner we usually eat as a family. And we always have a green vegetable and some meat and some potatoes, or, like rice or something like that. So, but I'm not seeing any change at all.
You have a lot of things that you're doing in your life. You're making sure you have your meals and your snacks, you're getting in your exercise, you're really thinking about how much you're eating, and somehow it doesn't seem to be leading towards the place you want to go. So I'm wondering, in the past, is there anything that has worked for you in terms of weight loss?
I think it was being younger.
Having a better metabolism.
Absolutely. Now that I'm 45, it seems to have all slowed down.
Yeah. Going towards menopause, right? Yeah.
Something like that.
Okay. So I'm going to demonstrate something, a technique in motivational interviewing called EPE, elicit, provide, elicit, because I think a lot of dietitians will think, well, I'm trained to tell people what to do. What do I do? Right. And so I'm going to demonstrate that. So elicit, I elicited for you what has made you, successful in the past. So Mathea, when you've lost weight, I know you're in roll, when you've lost weight in the past, besides being younger, is there anything specific that has seemed to work for you that you can remember?
I did Weight Watchers, and I counted all my points. And I did that. That seemed to work at least for like a month. And then if I didn't count points, it didn't seem to work too much.
So you had to really be super conscious about every bite you made.
Yeah, paying attention to the portion and then just tracking it, knowing kind of how much I could have.
And what helped with the tracking, do you think? What helped you be focused with that and motivated?
Well, at first you have to believe that it's going to work. So I just kind of said, okay, I'm going to give it a try. I'm going to give it an offer, see what happens. And then I did show some weight loss. And so after that, it's like, okay, if I track, I'm going to have the result. And it does keep me from going into the office, seeing people with donuts and going, oh, I can have a donut today.
So the results really helped you and kept you on track with not getting sidetracked with things at the office.
Yeah, just knowing that if I eat that donut, I'm going to have to not pay for it later, but adjust later. Well,
you realized in that moment that eating the donut wasn't going to lead you to the place you wanted to go.
Right.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, we could, in our session today, we could talk about food, we could talk about exercise, we could talk about sleep, or, mindfulness with eating, or we could talk about something else. So I'm wondering which of those resonate with you in terms of what would be most helpful to talk about in our session.
Well, whichever one of those is going to lead to me losing weight.
Yeah. Well, part of that is figuring out for you what makes the most sense to you today, right? Because really it's all about you. You're the driver of this, and how do we together figure out what's going to be most doable or sustainable for you?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really enjoy counting stuff or food type stuff, but I did see success with that in the past. So that might be the good thing to talk about.
Right. So maybe kind of how do you balance your meals or work on your food without having to be so super tight about the numbers? That might be helpful.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So I just modeled what we call EPE, elicit, provide, elicit. So what I did is elicit from you what you've been successful with in the past, and then I provided you a number of options. And the research shows when you provide options, everyone wants control and choice, so they're more likely to make a choice and pick the thing that they want to talk about, so that you can actually go to, and you can elicit and give them information about that thing, that they've gotten on board with. Even though it's a little bit of a setup, if you're willing to trust that and use it, your progress will be much quicker, because someone's brain will be more on board with receiving and listening to information.
Yeah, I felt like I was being really difficult, but I know I've had a lot of people that talk just like that, like I'm doing everything perfect. And, but yet, there's something wrong because it's out of balance. So,
right.
Yeah, that was good. Yeah. Was I being a really bad pain in the neck patient?
No, you were actually being a very normal patient. I always say I'm the end of the line when people come and see me. They're like, I've tried everything. I've done this. I've done that. And, they show up because they really do want the help. So how do you kind of reflect and hone in on what got in the way of them being successful? And that's a question you can ask someone. I wonder what's getting in the way of you doing what you truly want to do. They have to go in their head. They have to think about it. They have to say it out loud, which helps them realize what is getting in the way. And then if you reflect that statement towards change, it just like makes your life and your work so much easier and so much more fulfilling.
This is the thing I talk about sometimes with other RDs. Like if knowing how to lose weight was the way to lose weight, then we would all be skinny, right? But it is that next step after we know what to do. We know we need to eat healthier, not eat so many calories. You see that all the time, but kind of having that tailored in a way that is like, I understand what you mean when you say the agreement and that kind of the working agreement, like, okay, we're going to work together, but I'm not going to be the food police type of thing.
And telling people they're the driver, they're the ones that are in control, because emphasizing autonomy is really a way for people to think about, well, what is it that I truly want? What is it that I'm going to do? I need to take responsibility for my choices.
Yeah, and they don't come with a list of things that the dietitian told them to do. They leave with a list of things that they've agreed and feel like is possible over the next however long till they see you again, right?
Right. They start to leave with hope.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what we truly want, is how do we help people and keep our eyes on the horizon for change in people who don't have hope for themselves. And that's really what our true goal and mission is, a lot of times we say meet people where they're at. And in motivational interviewing, we don't say that. We say meet people at their dream. What's their hope? What's their dream? Why did they walk in that office? Is even though they've had all these lack of successes in their life, there's a part of them that is still looking for hope, that is still looking for a way to help their health, their life, their blood sugars, whatever it is. And how do you evoke whatever it is that's there so that you almost work yourself out of a job? So they realize they could do this, that it's possible, it's reasonable, it's sustainable. And, if we just give people lists of information and folders of things, most of the time it's, in the trash, it's not. And so how do we really figure out the piece of what it is they really need so that when they leave, they know what to, they have some hope about what they could do.
So how do you measure the results of motivational interviewing? Because I know we have medical nutrition therapy plans that tell us what to go through and what to track and all that stuff. But how do you measure the results when you're working with patients, when you're using motivational interviewing?
Well, there's about 800 clinical trials that showed when clinicians used motivational interviewing, there were much better outcomes. But I guess personally for me, it's, are people losing weight? Are their blood sugars, are they going down? Are their A1Cs going down? Or is their health changing? That happens all the time. I mean, I have a man in my practice who is 75 years old, and he came to me about a year and 9 months ago, so almost 2 years ago in December, his A1C was 9.5. His creatinine was 1.8. He's 5'8", and he was 330 pounds. And his physician said to him, I think you need to put your affairs in order because your health is not going in the right direction. And he walked in, and the physician said to me, I don't know if this is going to work because he's eats a lot, drinks a lot, very overweight, got a lot of bad risk factors, but let's see how it goes. And, I'd used a lot of motivational interviewing with him. He never knew about insulin resistance. So we talked about that. And, and I basically made it his choice, it's your choice, but this is what we could do together. And, this is one of those cool success stories where today he's 158 pounds. All he did was watch his carbs. We had him on metformin. He brought activity back into his life, and, he was really meticulous about his carb intake. And, I can say, I saw him a couple days ago. I see him every 2 or 3 weeks. And he said, my blood sugars are creeping up. I'm eating a little too many carbs, and I just need to, cut back on that. And all I had to do was reflect that. That's all I had to do. And he emailed me this morning and said, he emailed me his blood sugars over the last couple of days. He goes, look, I cut back on my carbs and they're coming right down. So he was the one giving the solution, but that came from all the work we had done with motivational interviewing. And I truly believe he's going to be one of the ones that completely maintains his weight. And his A1C is now 5, which is, unbelievable. And his creatinine came back down to 1.2. So, he's one of those success stories, but, he's not unusual. I mean, I have a lot of people in my practice that if, they're willing to go the road with you and their brains work well with motivational interviewing, I mean, they can be quite successful.
If you think about, I did mention, we have these medical nutrition therapy plans that when you get Medicaid or Medicare, you kind of have these guidelines that you follow. How do you still do that while you're doing motivational interviewing? Is the motivational interviewing kind of the precursor to that? Or how does that work together?
Well, I mean, it's easy to weave in motivational interviewing with your assessment, but I mean, one thing I always say in my trainings is you may get the best assessment at the first session, but if you haven't created that working alliance with someone, how good is your assessment if they don't come back? If they don't feel like you were able to create that alliance with them, right? And so, engagement is easy. I mean, if you're reflecting within those first 2 minutes and creating engagement, then someone's much going to be more willing to have a conversation with you. And sometimes, if you have questions to ask for your medical, in respect to your medical nutrition therapy, you can just say, I have a few questions I need to ask. Would that be okay? Because a thing in motivational interviewing, we say, when you ask permission, it's thought to show respect, right? And we always want to show respect. So if you have to ask a few questions, you just ask permission to do that. And then you kind of weave in the motivational interviewing with engagement, finding the focus of why they're there, and then evoking. So it can be a very fluid conversation. When you watch it, it can be very natural, and it's just where you're evoking more of the solutions from the client versus us, the clinician. And if we need to talk about things, because of course we do, especially with people who are diabetic or someone with gestational diabetes, you ask permission. You get them on board with receiving information. And Stephen Wolnick, one of the authors of MI, says, if you trust the method and you slow things down in your mind, the progress will be much quicker. And a lot of times as professionals, we're in such a hurry to get to the plan that we end up getting all this resistance, and it slows our progress, right? It creates people who are more resistant or reluctant to change. So motivational interviewing, it's a way of being with people. Are we present? Are we truly listening to what they need and reflecting that? Do we know really why they're there? A lot of times we think, oh, they're diabetic, they're here because we have to talk about their food. But is that really why they're there? Maybe they want to talk about, blood glucose management, or they want to talk about exercise. The more we go with where they want to go, the quicker our progress will be. And so it's just a lovely way of talking to people and making our job easier.
Do you have any quick tips or thoughts for how the listeners could use this in their day-to-day life without obviously knowing the whole scope of motivational interviewing? Any little thoughts?
Well, listening is hard. Most people don't do it. Mm-hmm. And a way you can practice is maybe start with a friend or start with your child, is ask a question, how was your day? And then whatever they say, try to do a reflection of what you heard or add meaning to what you heard, rather than asking a bunch of questions. And, people laugh when I do the checklist versus conversation like I did with you, but yeah, people do it. I'm a coder in motivational interviewing. So what does that mean? When people are trying to learn the language, they can submit a 20-minute tape, an audio tape of them having a conversation with a patient or a client. And then it's coded to the fidelity of the language in, are you evoking change talk? Are you showing empathy and partnership, right? And that's a really great way to start to learn motivational interviewing after you've gone to an initial workshop. Because even if you actually never have the conversation coded, if you actually get permission from a client to tape a conversation and you just don't use any names, so it's anonymous, you can hear what you said and what the client said. And this is a very important point. When I became a coder, I started realizing that you can almost 99% predict what a patient's going to say based on what the client says. What we say really does matter, right? So if we are telling someone what to do, we might get sustained talk, ambivalence. If someone feels judged, there's going to be discord. But if we're reflecting what makes someone successful, we're going to get change talk, right? So how do we choose our words carefully so that we get more change talk? And part of that is through affirmations and reflections. And reflections, like I said, are hard to learn. But if you practice in your day-to-day life, it's going to be more natural when you're with a client. Now, one qualifier I will say is it's very hard to use motivational interviewing with your spouse or someone that you have an agenda about. And this is a very important point. In motivational interviewing, we are guiding towards the possibility of change, but we don't have an agenda. Because if we have an agenda in our head, we're going to be forcing that agenda, which is going to result in sustained talk or ambivalence talk. Like with my husband, he doesn't like exercise. So I can't have a motivational interviewing conversation with him about exercise because my agenda is I want him to exercise. But I could have an MI conversation with him about something else, something related to work, where he just talks about what's going on and I reflect, I add meaning to his statements about what he's feeling or thinking, right? And that's, a way you can practice with your friends or, people that you come in contact with so that it's more natural when you're in the office.
That makes sense. It does seem like you said, it's a language. It needs practice and building up your skill level. So, all right. So my last question is, what's your favorite food? I try to ask everybody that. So what's your favorite food, Susan?
My favorite food is almond butter, like fresh ground almond butter. Mm. And my treat of the day is I always come home and have a tablespoon or so of almond butter with a square of 85% dark chocolate. And my favorite dark chocolate is Ultra Eco. So that's kind of my treat with a cup of tea when I get home from work. If I've done a big training or seen a bunch of clients, that's kind of my transition before dinner.
Oh, I love it. It's almost like Reese's, but much better.
Much better. And much healthier.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Susan, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It was a pleasure to have you on the show. I know my listeners have learned a lot about motivational interviewing and just even making some small changes. If listeners want to connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
So my website is susandopart.com, susandopart.com, and I have a lot of information on there about trainings, both in-person and virtual trainings, but I also have an MI blog, and what I try to do is, once a month or so, I'll put a type of tool for motivational interviewing, like what type of talk are you hearing, or how do you evoke change talk? And you can read a couple paragraphs on each thing. And, a lot of times it's a good way to reinforce in your brain how to use motivational interviewing, especially if you don't have time to go to a workshop or expand your use of it in any other way. It's a nice way to read about things. So, but I do have virtual trainings for people that aren't in California. I started doing those about a year ago with Zoom. It's actually, as you and I are on it right now, it's a pretty cool platform. It's actually better than I thought it would be, because you can put people in virtual breakout rooms and, show videos and whiteboards, and it's pretty much the next best thing to being in person. So it's a great way for people to learn this who don't have access to workshops in other areas, as well as being more affordable. So you can, if you have questions about motivational interviewing, you're welcome to email me, Susan at susandopart.com, or, send me a message via the website. But I love this beautiful collaborative partnership language. And I guess my hope is that more clinicians, especially dietitians, will get more proficient in motivational interviewing. So thank you, Mathea, for having me on your show so I can spread the word, and really, really appreciate it. And thank you for being my model for demonstrating the skills. It's truly a pleasure to be here.
Yay. All right. Well, guys, this has been another great episode of the Nutrition Experts Podcast, the podcast that is all about learning more so you can do more with nutrition in your life.
You've just listened to an episode of the Nutrition Experts Podcast. Be sure to get more information about this week's episode at www.nutritionexpertspodcast.com. Tune in next time for another great conversation with a nutrition expert and expand your personal knowledge in the field of nutrition, one conversation at a time.